McDonald with Whitewater Surety Group. Welcome to Surety Pints Properties. Really excited to have you all here. I see some new faces, some very young investors. Welcome. I hope you guys learned a lot about flipping houses. But today we have the pleasure of welcoming Jason. He's a local investor down in Wilmington. I actually met Jason almost 3 years ago now at a real estate investing meetup in Wilmington. He's helped me along my investing journey, and it's just a wealth of knowledge. His wife is the real MVP tonight, watching their 4 kids at home to let him come and share some wisdom with us. So if you want to get added to our email list, please sign in the sign-in sheet in the back. And if Jason's kind enough to share his presentation, we'll send that out to everybody as well. And we meet here second Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m. And yeah, excited to have you guys tonight, and turn it over to you, and thank you.
Thanks, man. Hey guys, my name's Jason. First want to say thank you, Sean, for letting me speak here. I really appreciate that. I wanted to talk about this topic because as an investor, it's probably the topic that I get asked about the most from all of my friends, my family. They see me doing deals and they think, you must be loaded. You must have a lot of money, or you must have a rich uncle. How are you doing this? So I wanted to break this down because there's a lot of noise out there. There's so much content to chew on from different sources. It's hard to filter through what's what you should take and what you shouldn't. So I want to try to clear this up a little bit. Obviously, we don't have a ton of time tonight, so I can only go into high-level view of some of this stuff. But hopefully, some of these concepts might be newer to you, and at least some of this terminology you may be able to go and do further research on your own is the goal. But a little bit about myself first. I am 28. I got married almost 10 years ago now this year. My wife and I have 4 children. She's a dental hygienist, but recently retired. And I am a full-time trust officer dealing with institutional trust funds. So still working the W-2 job while flipping houses and buying rentals as well. And yeah, so let's dig into it. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through a case study of the very first flip that I did, that I had no money and I had no experience, and no idea how I was going to work, how I was going to do it. And we're going to talk through some other methods of finding deals, funding deals, finding contractors as we go along through this process of this case study. This is the first property that I flipped. It's actually a double wide out in Rocky Point, which is where I live, born and raised my whole life. And this is in the neighborhood that we used to live in a few years back. So I bought this in December of 2019. That gives you an idea of how recent that was. It wasn't that long ago. How I found the deal. So my wife and I, we like to go on walks in the evenings with the kids when the weather's nice. And this particular evening, I told my wife, I said, babe, we walk by this house every day over here that looks abandoned and run down. The mailbox is taped closed. Clearly no one's living there. Let me see if I can find out who owns this property. I didn't know how to do that yet, so I took a picture of the property. I went on the neighborhood Facebook page, and I put the picture on there. I said, hey, does anybody know who owns this property? Because it looks vacant, and I'd like to see if they want to sell it. Well, bad news, nobody answered that question. Good news, because I did that work and put that effort in, someone else in the neighborhood private messaged me and said, hey, we're in the process of moving from our mother-in-law to our mother-in-law's house, who's now legally blind, and her husband recently passed. So we need to move quickly. Would you be interested in this property over on this street? I said, of course. Do you have an idea what you're asking? Conversation continued from there. Other ways people find deals other than Facebook groups and walking properties. Number one, wholesalers. I think at the last event, my man Brandon back there spoke. He does a lot of this. Wholesalers are basically the ones that are doing a lot of this other stuff to find the off-market deals, get the deals under contract with the sellers, and then they will assign that contract to an end buyer like myself for an assignment fee. And that's usually a $5,000 or $10,000 markup, but I know a guy that literally just made like a $700,000 assignment fee on a large multifamily complex. So there's really no limit. Direct mail is just paid marketing. You just send a bunch of postcards out or letters, cold calling, text. You can do SEO, where you do certain things, write blogs to have your website put at the top of the search results on Google, things like that. Social media ads, of course, your other methods here. I actually, a few days ago, had my first billboard go up. So I thought that was pretty cool. It's funny that everybody since seeing that has been like, oh man, congratulations on your billboard, that's so exciting. And I'm like, you're congratulating me for spending money? Like, anyone can get a billboard, right? But nonetheless, it's cool. Whether or not it will produce any results remains to be seen, but I'm giving it about a 4-month trial, and if I only land one deal from that for what I'm spending, it's more than worth it. So you just gotta be creative and do multiple streams, multiple avenues of marketing, connecting with wholesalers, doing all this other stuff. Another note on the wholesaler side that I'll mention is everybody just thinks there's this abundance of wholesalers when they're first starting, and if I find a wholesaler, then I'm going to be able to find deals, and it's just that easy. Well, you'll quickly learn that's not the case, that there are very, very few consistent wholesalers out there, and the ones that have been doing it a little while and are finding deals have buyers that are already willing to pay more money than you will, if you're paying the correct amount for a property. One way I've found some success with wholesalers is I'll network with newer aspiring wholesalers, people that haven't done any deals yet, and I'll kind of hold their hand. Even though I've never wholesaled a property, I've bought from wholesalers plenty of times in the past, so I know how it works. I've got all the documents for it, so I'll spend a little bit extra time with these aspiring wholesalers. I'll walk them through the process. I'll help them pull comps. I'll help them determine what a buyer's willing to pay. I'll give them the forms that they need. I'll tell them what closing attorney they can use to do the assignment. And usually, sometimes it's a waste of time and that wholesaler never finds a deal. That's just part of it. But sometimes it does prove to be fruitful, and that wholesaler does end up finding a great deal on their first deal. And because I'm the one that spent all that time helping them and walking them through that, I always get first dibs on that first deal, just as a thank you. So that's something I've had luck with. But even those people, as soon as their buyer list grows by a little bit, they realize, hey, I can get an extra 10 grand than what Jason's willing to pay me. So, sorry, Jason. So I can't blame them, but that's just the way it works. So what you need to know is where do I start? If I'm going to be sending direct mail, if I'm going to be cold calling or whatever, who do I send direct mail to? Who do I cold call? Well, you have to start with a list. And there's a couple ways that you can do this. You can either build your own list or you can buy a list. If you're going to buy a list, you can go to websites like listsource.com and you can set whatever filters you want and pay for a list, and it'll spit out, however many, hits there are on that. Or you can do what's called driving for dollars to build your own list, and you can use an app like Landglide or Deal Machine. Landglide's a lot cheaper, but has a lot less features, so there's a give and take there. But you drive around using these apps in neighborhoods that you would like to buy properties in, and you look for distressed properties. You look for properties that clearly need a new roof, or all their landscaping is overgrown, etc., or especially vacant. You'll add all those to your list. Well, then you take that list and you have to figure out, what am I going to do with it? And the question that I always ask people when they say, well, how do I get started? How am I going to do this and reaching out to people? The question I always have is, do you have more time or do you have more money? If you have no time and no money, you're out of luck. If you got one or the other, you can do this. So if you've got more time than you have money, then you probably need to be the one actually cold calling or cold texting or leaving voicemails for people from these lists. If you have more money than you have time, you can either pay a VA, virtual assistant, to do those things for you, or you can just pay for direct mail and do it yourself. There's several different options. If you're doing direct mail, you can just upload that list that you built or you bought to a website like Yellow Letter HQ and just put it in the format that they require the spreadsheet to be in, pick what template you want, boom, send out however many you want at a time. To give you an idea, I usually send out 1,000 postcards at a time through Yellow Letter HQ, and it costs about 48 cents per postcard, including postage. So roughly a little under $500 to send out 1,000 postcards. But in sending out 6,000 or so postcards, 1,000 to the same list for, a month in a row for 6 months, that's roughly $3,000 that I'm spending, but that's probably going to get me at least 2 deals, which is really great considering the average cost to find a deal is closer to $5,000. So if you're doing cold calling, cold texting, you have to get the phone numbers from the people. How do you get the phone numbers? You skip trace them. You don't want to skip trace 1,000 phone numbers by yourself. You're going to shoot yourself. You want to use a company like Batch Leads to upload your list to, or you can, I think Batch Leads even allows you to drive for dollars through their app too, so it's all in one place. And then they will skip trace all of these addresses for you and provide you with the contact phone numbers with a decent level of accuracy. Some of them, maybe 25-30% are not going to be accurate, but a lot of them will be. So back to the case study. So she said that the seller said that they wanted $65,000 for this double wide. I knew fixed up it was probably worth around $120,000. So I thought it probably needed a good bit of work for me to say no to this. So I set up the time to go see it. And I negotiated a price of $60,000 with her. And one little tool I'll give you that I use to do this is, I told her, I said, how about this? I said, I'll pay you $60,000 and I'll cover all closing costs. Well, what do most people think of when you think of closing costs? They're thinking about when they're on the buyer side and they're using a lender that has all the lender fees, and when they're closing, and your normal closing costs, most people are going to think that that's probably in the $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 range. They may not realize when they're selling the property that the closing costs to prepare the seller documents is usually about $200, $300. So it's a larger perceived value to a lot of sellers than what it actually is worth. One thing before we get to that part is, as far as qualifying the lead and what makes a good deal, probably the most common thing you'll hear in regards to what flippers are willing to pay for a property, and I know there are plenty out there willing to pay more, but and the general rule of thumb is something called the 70% rule. The 70% rule means that your combined purchase price plus rehab costs does not exceed 70% of the after repair value. So in this case, you can see my rehab budget was only $10,000 for materials and labor. So if I had a purchase price of $60 and a rehab budget of $10, I really only needed the after repair value to be $100 to meet the 70% rule and still be considered a good deal. Well, in this case, I did a little bit better than that on this one, as you can see. So again, some people are willing to pay more than that. I'm willing to pay more than that in certain cases if the property needs close to no work, or if there's seller financing involved or something like that. Just depends on the deal. But that's just a general rule of thumb to go by. So I got the property under contract. I just used the standard realtors association. I'm not a realtor, but I used their form. I think it's T2. Is that what it is? The offer to purchase. 2-T. Yeah. See, I don't even know what it's called. It's the 15-page form that has all the ridiculous legalism in it. But I just used that because I knew I was going to buy the property. But there's a line in that contract that specifically states that contract is not assignable unless written upon unless there's a written agreement by both parties saying that they agree to assign it. So if you were going to assign a property like this, or planning to, or not sure, you would want to use a different contract than what I used that does allow you to assign it. So this was the fun part. So I got the deal under contract. I'm a little excited, but I'm also about to wet myself because I have no idea how I'm going to fund this thing. I have no clue. I didn't have the money. I didn't have family that had the money. I had no idea. So I start calling around hard money lenders, and I just heard of that possibility from listening to the Bigger Pockets podcast, which if you're not already doing that, you need to. And so I start calling around, and I get even more nervous because every lender's telling me, no, we don't do hard money loans on manufactured homes. And I'm like, oh crap, like I didn't even know that, I didn't think about that was gonna be a problem. But I called, and I finally found one based out of Charlotte that was willing to do it on a manufactured home, even though it was my first flip. And because my numbers were good enough, they financed 100% of the purchase price and the rehab cost. So they funded the full $70,000. Excuse me. So the term, I could have done as little as a 3-month term on that, which is really all it should have needed. But I asked them to set 6 months just to give me some slack in case the contracts fell through. I always recommend that because contracts always fall through for whatever reason. And that did happen in this case. 2 contracts fell through, so I ended up holding it a total of 5 months. Had I only been on the 3-month term, I would have had to pay a whole lot more money for them to redo that loan for me. Or technically, they would have been within their rights to take the property from me if they wanted to. But they don't want to do that, generally. So there is a difference between full doc loan and no doc loans for some lenders. Some lenders, that's exactly what it sounds like. You can get a slightly better rate by providing all of your financials. If you have a good financial standing, good credit score, income, all that stuff, you can often get a little bit better rates, but it's not required. So this lender charged me 3.5 points up front, so they charged me 3.5% of that $70,000 at the closing of the purchase, and charged 12% interest annualized. And so I had to bring roughly, between the points and the fees and all the closing costs, I had to bring roughly $8,000 to close, but I didn't have that either. So this is a little trick that I've gotten great feedback from before that people like me to elaborate on. So I didn't have the $8,000 I need to bring to close, but I knew I had a credit card with a pretty decently high limit. So I can't take credit, I didn't come up with this idea, but I did learn about it and I used it. There's a way using like Venmo or Cash App where you can access the money from a credit card. And the way that you do it is, so I have a Venmo account, my wife has a Venmo account. I used my Venmo account to send $8,000 and pay the 3% charge that they charge you to my wife's Venmo account. So they charged my credit card $8,000 and then sent it, well, plus 3%, and then sent it to my wife's Venmo account. Now my wife has $8,000 in her Venmo account. She then transferred that money back to my Venmo account. Now I've got $8,000 cash in my Venmo account. I then cash that out into my bank account, and boom, I've got the money I need to close. Disclaimer, they didn't let me do all the $8,000 at one time, so there were several multiples of $1,000 and $2,000 transfers. So, you know.
Creative, honestly.
Right? You gotta work for it sometimes, man. It is. Let me just say, we're learning about doing this with no money down. It is a lot easier when you have money to use. If you've got at least, $20,000-$25,000 in the bank that you can tap into, or a line of credit or something, it does make that a lot easier. That liquidity is very helpful, but not necessary. The other part is, so when you use a hard money lender for the rehab, it's usually going to be done on a draw schedule. So what that means is the lender's not actually going to give you the money for the renovations until you've already done the work, or at least the work for that draw. In my case, the rehab budget was only $10,000, so I just did one draw. If the rehab budget was, $30,000, I could have asked them to do 2 different draws for $15,000 apiece. And so what happened here is I had to front the money for the rehab, and then once the rehab was done, the lender released that $10,000 to me. But I didn't have the money for the rehab. So I used my credit card to buy all the materials and have them delivered. And then I found a handyman that I told him I wouldn't be able to pay him until a week after he was finished, to give enough time for the lender to come send somebody to inspect the property and then give me the money. He was okay with that, so that's what we ended up doing. Other ways to fund deals, obviously regular financing, using the bank, 15, 20, 25% down. Private lenders, just any individual. I was telling Sean earlier, actually, the last event that I came to here, I think it was last month, I was sitting over here and Sean just made a mention that, hey, our friend Jason's going to speak next month, and just because he pointed me out, 2 different people walked over and offered to be private lenders for me. And one of them I've since reached out to, and she's already committed to fund the deal that I'm closing next month. So that's the power of networking. And with private lenders, I can often get better rates than what I'm getting with hard money lenders. Private lenders can also loan from, if you don't know what those 5 letters means, it stands for self-directed IRA. If they've got an IRA or they've got a 401k with a company that they no longer work at, they can roll that money over into a self-directed IRA, and then they can loan that money to your LLC from that IRA. So they still get all the tax benefits from their tax-deferred or tax-free account by lending it to you through the self-directed IRA. A HELOC is just a home equity line of credit. If you've got a property you're living in, you've got a lot of equity in it, see if you can get a HELOC. There are some credit unions that will fund up to 100% combined LTV. Corning Credit Union is one of them. And so if you've got a lot of equity in a property and you can get a line of credit to have 50, 100, 150,000 that you can tap into. I mean, I've got one of my primary residence and I use it all the time. And it's just like a credit card. You don't pay any interest on anything that you're not using. You only are paying interest when you have that money taken out and you're using it, but then you can pay it right back off like a credit card and reuse it again and again. Seller financing, it's exactly what it sounds like. The seller acts as the bank instead of the bank being the bank. Seller carryback is very similar but a little bit different. Usually when you hear seller carryback, what that means is that you have purchased the deal some other way, whether it's cash or using bank financing or hard money or whatever, but then after that, the seller is going to loan you back a portion of that. So there are ways that you could buy properties that, you can go to a hard money lender that's willing to buy, fund up to a certain percentage, but it's not quite enough to cover all of it. Well, you can negotiate with that seller that after you close, they're going to give you a second position lien behind the hard money lender for that difference and be into. You'd have to find the money temporarily to make it work, but then you get it back and you can be into deals with no money that way. Subject to, Aaron talked about a little bit last month. It's essentially where you have the seller still has a mortgage on the property, but you're going to buy it. You're going to have the deed put into your name or your LLC's name, but that mortgage still stays in that seller's name, which most people don't think is legal to do, but it actually is. A lot of closing attorneys aren't comfortable doing those, but you can do it. There are some out there that will do it. And there is something called a due on sale clause that it could be triggered if the bank noticed the change in the deed name and they were to audit it and find out. They could say, hey, this loan's due right now, which is why I'm not really comfortable with the subject to deals for like long-term holds. But if you were just doing it just long enough to flip the property or long enough to renovate it and then refinance it in your own name, then I'm totally comfortable with that, because what are the odds that the bank's going to do an audit and find it and then call it due within a matter of a few months? So that's another creative way. Another thing, novation agreements. This is basically where you go to the seller and you say, hey, Mr. Seller, I'm agreeing to pay you $65,000 for this property, but you're still going to own it the whole time that I'm renovating it, and then once we sell it after I renovate it, you're going to get your $65,000 and I'm going to keep everything else over that. And you would have him sign that agreement saying that he's going to accept that amount after you close on the resale. I've not done either of these before, but I figured I'd mention them because this is kind of a creative finance discussion, and those are tools that are often utilized. All right, so the way I renovated the property, I got a referral for my handyman that I used from my property manager, and he finished the work in 2 weeks because it was just a very small cosmetic flooring, paint, backsplash, dishwasher, very, very simple little flip. And truth be told, if you go back and look at the listing pictures of this, if you jotted down the address earlier, you should be ashamed of me for the flip job that I did, because I was just trying to spend bare minimum and be that flipper that nobody likes because I didn't know what I was doing. So if I were going back now doing this flip, I would put a little more into it, do a little bit more, but that's what I did at the time. So some other ways to find contractors, referrals from other investors and property managers. It's going to be a hard one getting good referrals on contractors from other investors because one, it's very hard to find them, and if you do find one, you want to keep them close to your chest. And if I give you my only good contractor's information and then you go and use my good contractor for 4 flips that you have going at the same time, my best contractor is not going to be available to do my own jobs. So that's very difficult, and that's why sometimes, like, even though most investors are very happy to share connections and resources and stuff, this is one of those areas that for those reasons they might not be as willing to give out the contacts. But also just know that referrals don't necessarily mean anything. I had a contractor that was referred to me by another one of my contractors that was really good because he had worked with them before, and this contractor that was referred to me ended up stealing 16 grand from me, and that was painful. So referrals don't necessarily mean anything. You need to vet the people yourselves. Other ways to find contractors: active job sites. If you see a dumpster in a driveway, you see renovations being done, go swing in there, see what's going on, see if it's the people renovating the property themselves or if it's actual GC that maybe you can connect with. And while you're there, ask them if you can walk through the property and see the quality of work that they're doing. What more can you ask for? Of course, you got your standard internet searches, but another place. Some people are hesitant to look, but Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, a lot of people immediately just jump to the conclusion that, if people are advertising work on there, then they're not good enough, they don't have enough word of mouth. And yes, sometimes that's true, but also sometimes you might have a really good contractor or a really good handyman that just moved here from somewhere else, and he doesn't have all these connections and the word of mouth yet, and he might be a really, really good resource for you. So, the case study, final outcome, total hold time was roughly 5 months because the contracts fell through 2 different times, so I had to sell this property 3 times to finally get closed. Sale price of $125 with $5,000 in seller concessions. It was an FHA buyer, so I had to spend another extra couple of grand to do the extra foundational work that FHA requires because they're dumb. So between the points that I paid up front and the interest over that 5 months period that I paid to the hard money lender, I paid them roughly $11,000 total, which is kind of painful. It's a lot, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't have been able to make the deal work otherwise. So it was more than worth it. My net profit before taxes on this deal was a little over $26,000. So very first flip with no money, no experience, using other people's money, leveraging credit cards, 14-day turnaround on the renovations, $26,000 profit. I'd say that's pretty good use of my time. Question I want to address, because everybody asks me every time I flip a house, well, why'd you sell that one? Why didn't you keep it? Why didn't you do this and do that? That's like the number one question I get. Why didn't you BRRRR it? Everybody loves the BRRRR method, which if you're new and you don't know what that is, it stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. And if you buy right and you do it correctly, the theory is that you will be able to refinance all of your money back out of it, so you then have no money left into the deal at the end of the day. So you have infinite returns. Well, the issue with that method is you often, with that method, only end up having a property that pure cash flow, around $100 a month. And I don't know exactly with this market, but with the Wilmington market, with the way that the housing prices are, by the time you flip a house, you've got so much equity in it that if you kept it, your return on your equity, which is ROE, a term that's not often discussed, especially when talking about the BRRRR method, your return on equity is often not that good. Because let's say that property that's cash flowing $100 a month, well, let's say when you're done flipping it, you've got $70,000 in equity, and then after selling costs and commissions and some taxes, let's say you come out with $40,000. Well, I don't know, what's $1,200 divided by $40,000 in equity? Like 3%? Is that a good return? If you're going to go and blow that $40,000 on a new Camaro or something, then yeah, that's a great return. Keep it. But if you're able to put that 40 into a different property that will also cash flow, that will also appreciate, that will also give you principal pay down, and also give you the tax benefits, then apples to apples, in a lot of cases, it's better to sell the property, at least when it comes to single family, in most markets. In other markets that have lower price points, such as Jacksonville might be a little better cash flow market where it makes sense to hold some of these properties. I haven't looked that far into those numbers to see the comparison of rents to prices, but it's definitely got to be better than Wilmington for sure. The other flip or hold reasoning with this particular deal that we're talking about is you can't, and I didn't even know this when I first bought the property, but you can't refinance a manufactured home as an investment property. So even if I wanted to do a BRRRR on this property and refinance it as an investment property, I wouldn't be able to. So that's another reason that it makes sense to sell it. So that's the gist of the case study and the gist of what we're going to talk about. I wanted to mention this though because when I first started learning, you don't know what you don't know. And there were so many things that I learned from listening to various podcasts that I heard these certain stories and situations, and I either thought, oh my God, that's incredible, or no way, he's lying. Like, there's no way that's possible. So until you have people talk about it, you learn about it, you may not even really know what's possible. So I just want to share this one little example, hopefully motivate some people as well and show you, what can be done. So this is a single wide trailer in Leland on over an acre of land that I bought from a wholesaler for $15,000. Don't ask how, I don't know. I don't know why the wholesaler thought it was worth as little as he did. And also I got lucky that the market continued to go up from the time that I bought it to when I resold it. But I did no work to that. I borrowed that $15,000 from somebody else. So I didn't have it. My money was in another deal at the time. I borrowed that $15,000 from somebody else at 10% interest, a private money lender, just a regular individual. 7 months later, I sold this property to a cash buyer for $98,000. And I didn't do any work to it. So here's some $70,000+ worth of capital gains. Well, I did my first 1031 exchange. If you don't know what that is, it's another word to look up and learn more about. It basically allows you to defer all of your capital gains into another property. So I ended up buying this 8-unit apartment building in Burgaw. I live in Rocky Point, so Burgaw is very close for me. I found this off market, direct to seller. I negotiated a purchase price of $450. I haven't really had to do much of anything to that property either. I've just done a few little things and been bumping up rents to where they should be or close to it. I got an unsolicited offer from a different 1031 buyer about a month ago for $900,000 for that property. I'm not going to sell it because what did I do? I looked at my return on equity, and this one makes more sense for me to hold, even if I were able to sell it at $900,000 right now. So, took a $15,000 loan, somebody else's money, within 7 months, turned it into over $500,000 in equity. That's what's possible.
How did you find the seller of the 8-unit apartment?
Handwritten letters. So I do mass postcards for my single family flips, but for the multi-family stuff, like 5+ unit stuff, I haven't in a while, but I do handwritten letters. And I've also, to try to streamline that a little bit, I created a little handwritten letter template where I hand wrote a letter and then made a bunch of copies of it to where all I had to do was fill in the name and an address. And then I can still make a handwritten letter, but do a whole lot more and send them out. So that just worked out where the rents were a lot lower than they were supposed to be. The couple was going through divorce and they needed to sell it. So it's a lot of it, as far as looking for deals and marketing, it's about volume and timing. You have to send out a lot, you have to reach a lot of people, and you have to hit them at the right time, which is why, going back to the postcards, I said, if you've got a list of 1,000, well, send a postcard to that same exact list once a month or once every month and a half for 6, 8, 10 months. So because not only are you building credibility every time they see your face again on that postcard, but also the first time you hit them, their life might be perfectly fine. But then 4 months later, they might now be, ready to divorce, or they've got to move across the country for whatever. So timing plays a big factor in that. So that's the presentation. This is my contact info. That is my personal cell, so please do not abuse it. That's my email address, of course. You can find me on Bigger Pockets and LinkedIn as well. I am on Facebook, but if I don't know you, I'm probably not going to add you. But Sean, if you want to email me or Sean, we'll be happy to share this presentation with you via email. Do you have any questions?
I got it. So what are you, what's your kind of portfolio look like now? Are you keeping any properties rental besides the commercial deal?
Yeah, so great question. I have sold all of my single family rentals because of what the numbers tell me to do. So as of right now, my only rentals are those 8 units in Burgall. I am actively looking for and in discussions with owners of some larger property, 10, 15, 20 unit properties, trying to find some more apartments like that I can buy, preferably that need a little bit of work or have some kind of value add component to it. And I'm also looking for even bigger stuff, 30, 40, 50 unit, because I've got a lot of individuals, family, friends, other investors that I've known for a while that keep asking me if I've got an opportunity for them to invest with me on a deal. And I haven't yet come across one big enough that was needed. So now I'm starting to open the horizons a little bit to look for a little bit bigger deal. So if and when the time comes, I will have an opportunity to give some of these other individuals the opportunity to invest with me in a deal.
What's your criteria generally?
Criteria for what?
For like the numbers for
multifamily?
Yeah, what are you looking for?
That's kind of hard to answer because a lot of it depends on the property itself. Ideally, I love to find something that is distressed and needs a lot of work, that I can go in and have my contractor fix everything up, and I can be in cheap enough that I can refinance and be the sole owner of it. But if I can find a deal that I can't quite do that and need to bring on a few partners, I'm okay with that too. But in this case, I was really just looking at what my return on my investment would be. So I knew I had to put $90,000 down to put $20,000 down for that 8 unit, which the $90,000 came from that trailer. So I just did a calculation based off of what I was assuming the insurance taxes and expenses and all that management fees to be. What was my cash on cash return going to be on that investment? Which is another reason why if I can get a seller to finance me a deal with only 5% down or 10% down, instead of me having to put 20% down, I'm willing to pay a decent bit more for that property because even though the cash flow is not where I want it to be, my return on the investment is still higher. So I don't yet have a specific cash on cash return number that I'm looking for, but I just look for really good deals. Yeah.
Do you use the calculators on Bigger Pockets to figure out your numbers?
I don't, only because being I meant to say this at the very beginning, a little bit more about my background. I went to UNCW for finance, and I was a licensed financial advisor for a short time after that, before I went to go work at a bank, and then when my division got acquired, I went to go work for that company that acquired them. So because of the finance background and the love for Excel spreadsheets, I just created my own basic calculator, and that's what I use. I mean, it's a very simple calculator. probably does similar to what Bigger Pocket stuff does. I'm sure their calculators are great, but I just like to see it all in this one little spot that I know exactly how every variable is going to change when I change one thing. So that's what I use.
Can you talk about how you calculate your ROE, your return on equity, by annual return?
Yeah, so with the spreadsheets that I was talking about is more what I use when I'm evaluating whether or not to purchase property, what my return on that investment's going to be. Calculating ROE is it's a bit simpler. It's more just in your head or napkin sketch kind of stuff, because just like in that example that I went over, if I'm just doing rough estimates and saying I'm going to have 40,000 equity after everything's said and done, all I have to do is calculate, well, if I have projected cash flows of $1,200 for the whole year, 1,200 divided by 40,000 is only 3%. So that's basically how that calculation goes. It's a little simpler. Yep.
If you're mostly buying properties and need some work, are you usually working with hard money lenders then? Or are you doing some other?
So I yes and no. Quick question, Patrick, is MC Capital, would you consider that a hard money lender?
Private capital.
Private capital, okay. So for a lot of my deals, I've got a few pending right now. A lot of my deals I use Patrick Story's group, MC Capital, out of Wilmington, and they will fund my deals just like in this example that I talked about. They'll fund 100% of my purchase and repairs as long as I keep that, total loan to value under that 70%. And they do it at a much better rate than what you saw that other example from. But I do have a small handful of other just private individuals that I do get loans from on properties, but a lot of those folks are limited on how much they have available to lend, or when I bring a property to them, maybe they do have a decent amount, but they already have 3 other loans out to other investors if they do this a lot. So it's partially timing. So like right now, I got 2 different properties in Rocky Point, and that one of them I funded by bringing 2 different private lenders together because I needed $80,000 total to close. Well, less than that, but I got the loan for 80. And they each had, one of them only had 40 that they could loan. So I took his 40 and got 40 from another one to get the whole 80. And the other one in Rocky Point, I've got a lady that's going to fund the full 65 for me as soon as we close on that here soon. So it's kind of a mixture. I always go to his group whenever I have a deal that none of my other less expensive private lenders are able to do, because I know with certainty that his group's got more than enough capital and they're going to close, without me having to worry about it. So I know that was kind of a long-winded question. So yeah, kind of a mixture of private capital and just individual lenders.
The individuals, like the private money that you work with,
Mm-hmm.
are those people that you found personally, like you know them from like personal life, or people you connected with some other way?
Yeah, so great question. Some of them are family that have 40 or 50 or 60,000 laying around. Some of them are other real estate investors that they're 20 years further down the road than I am, and they've got capital laying around and they trust me with it. Some of them are people that I've met at meetups just like this, and it depends. It's hard if you're trying to do your first flip. You're more than likely not going to find a private individual that's going to be willing to trust you with it. But to be honest, once you just do one flip, that gives you a ton of credibility, a lot more than you would think, that other people see it and are willing to lend to you. And after I did my first flip and I started going to meetups and talking about it, do you think I ever told anybody that was my only flip if they didn't ask? I just talk about, oh yeah, well on my last flip I just did this and got that, and then they think, okay, this guy's he's flipping houses and getting it done, and so not lying to anybody, but not trying to tell anybody that I'm inexperienced unless they ask for further detail.
Did you ever go through anything like a period of imposter syndrome or anything like that as you were getting started?
As in me,
Like saying you're a flipper or like trying to raise that private money or like when you're interfacing with people in meetups and things like that. Like you're working on your first one, you're just done your first one. Like how did you grow
Sure.
that experience?
Very interesting question. So, I would say for the most part, no, because I'm primarily more of a quiet, just get it done and move along kind of person. So, I kind of did my first deal in silence, if that makes sense. Like a lot of people didn't necessarily that it was going on. I didn't go to meetups and say I'm a real estate investor before I did anything. And I know a lot of people advocate to do that to get in that mindset, and that's up to each individual person's preferences. But no, I never tried to say that I was something that I wasn't. But I did feel a little bit like that after I'd done my first flip and I was talking to some of those people. I think that's probably more along what you're asking.
Yeah. Or like talking to the first seller from Facebook and they're like, yeah, I'll sell it for 60. And you're like, great, but I don't have 60.
Right.
What through your mindset like got you through that, grow that humble?
Yeah, so honestly, just the fact that I knew it could be done is what, because I like to think that I do a good job of not worrying about all of the details of how something's going to get done before I get there. Now, I am very conservative when it comes to underwriting deals, and I'll only take good deals, but I don't know. Just, yeah, I was confident because I knew it could be done, that I just went in there as if I was just confident, and I just portrayed that confidence. And it's funny, I mean, I know you know as well as I do that when you go to these sellers with confidence, how often are you ever asked for proof of funds or asked to even put earnest money or due diligence down? Right? Never. Nobody ever asks for that. Just they don't think about it. But it's about being confident. But as long as it's things like this and listening to podcasts that just help you know what is possible. So when you do go out and find a good deal, you know that you're going to be able to fund the deal, or you know that you know somebody else that knows how to fund the deal, and you can reach out to your network to help you with that. So, with that in mind, I just want to encourage everybody that's just getting started, don't get hung up on all those details. Don't worry about every single thing. If you find a legitimately good deal, then go ahead and get it under contract and lock it up, and then worry about the rest of it later. If you want to ask the seller to set the closing date a little further out than normal to give yourself a little slack, then do that. It gives you a little bit more time. But, don't get into that analysis paralysis or all you're doing is consuming education but never doing anything or taking any action. That's what gets things done in this industry, is consistent action. And I'm not, even though I've had a decent bit of success, first and foremost, let me clarify, I'm a man of God and I give all honor and credit to my success to God. But other than that, what gets me these deals is just consistent action. I'm not somebody that is hustling, grinding, spending 60 hours a week looking for real estate deals like some people think. Just because I've done a good handful of deals, a lot of people assume that I'm just spending a crazy amount of time doing this, and I'm not. It's more about the consistency, about just doing a little bit every day or every other day, just moving that needle a little bit. It's really all it takes. And the longer you do it, the more that consistently builds and builds and builds. And then before you know it, you're like, oh man, I got this big pipeline of deals and all these other people that I'm consistently following up with. And you almost start to have a really good problem of having too many deals. So just daily consistent action. Yep.
How do you screen your contractors, or what questions do you ask them to make sure that they're someone
That is very hard. So the hardest part about this is finding a deal. The second hardest part is finding and managing contractors. Because generally speaking, contractors suck. And in the market that we're in right now, there's so much work out there, so little contractors. There are so many that are not hesitant to screw you over, just like one of them did me. So you do want to vet, you do want to make sure that they're licensed, that they are insured. You want to get a certificate of insurance, a COI from them. You want to get a W-9 from them before they start work, so your CPA can send them a 1099 at the beginning of the following year. As long as they can provide those things, you know they're at least somewhat legitimate without looking into anything further. But then, yeah, you do want to look further, either look at some of their work, check out if they got a website or not. But two, just check their credibility in general. Do you know anybody that knows them? Do you know anybody that's done any of their work? Can they take you to a current job site to show you anything? And another thing too, I didn't think of when I got screwed over by that one contractor is, does this contractor own any assets? Because if they do screw you over like that, what's your recourse? You know, if I go and file a suit against this guy, you know, without having to get a lawyer and all that, if I file a suit just for $10,000, even if I win that and I win, they're gonna just slap a piece of paper on my wall that says, "Congrats, you won," but you're never gonna see that money because this guy lives in a trailer park that he's renting from and owns 2 piece of junk vehicles and no other assets and no retirement, so you're never gonna see that money again. So that's one little thing that I had to learn the hard way too when it comes to vetting contractors is just see, like, do they themselves own assets? Do they have something that if they did that and you were to put a lien against a property so at some point down the road if they ever sold it, you'd get that money back? Is that an option? Do they have that out there? Anything else?
Thanks for sharing, Jason. Thanks for this transparency and the wisdom. I know he'll stick around for a little while if you have questions for him, and if not, thank you everyone for coming. Again, please sign in if you want a copy of the slides and if you want the invitations to the next meetup. And yeah, have a good night, everyone. Thanks.